Hello, my name is Shane Larengo, and I love stories. Whether I write them, live them, perform them, listen to them, or talk about them, I was born for storytelling. Today, I welcome Peggy Helmick-Richardson. She is a professional storyteller, a journalist, a fiber crafter, in ways that she can tell you more. She's my friend. She's my mentor. She helped me put the questions and this kind of interview format together. She was willing to be my first storyteller stories interview, and I really appreciate her being here. I met her through the Dallas Storytelling Guild and the Tejas Storytelling Association. She was a featured teller in 2019 at the Texas Storytelling Festival. She's told at the National Storytelling Festival. She tells all over the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. She is a tandem teller with her husband, Gene, and they are twice upon a time storytellers. I knew I would blow something. So welcome, Peggy. I appreciate you being here with me today.
Thank you. But there is one thing we have not told at the National Storytelling Festival.
Oh.
It was the National Storytelling Conference.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for me. And the other thing that I wanted to tell that I missed, so I'm glad that we went back to correct something, is that you were also the 2016 recipient of the John Henry Faulk Award, given to a person who has made significant contribution to the art of storytelling in the Southwest by the Tejas Storytelling Association. Would you tell me a little bit more about who John Henry Faulk is for non-Texans, possibly, and and what that means to Tejas to give that award?
Oh, I would love to, because John Henry Faulk's one of my heroes. Most people who know John Henry Faulk today think of him as the storyteller on Hee Haw, which drives me nuts. I mean, he was fabulous on the show. He was always fun. But why he's a hero is because he was one of the people willing to take on McCarthyism. He went head to head with Joseph McCarthy and sued his butt for the damage he did. Now, he won. He won a huge settlement. But by the time it was all said and done, he pretty much walked out with nothing. But he stuck to it no matter how hard it was, because he had the morals and standards that told him he had to do it.
And see, I don't think I ever knew he was on Hee Haw, but I knew he was a journalist.
Well, he was a journalist, but he became more known as a radio personality.
Okay.
He had one of the top radio shows in the nation.
Love it.
Yeah. And he was completely ruined by Joseph McCarthy, along with a lot of other people.
Yeah.
But he was the one that went, oh, hell no, you aren't doing this to me.
So what does it mean for Tejas Storytelling Association to create an award named after John Henry Faulk and then present that to storytellers?
I can't speak for the organization, but as a recipient, I take it almost as an obligation that sometimes storytelling requires telling something really uncomfortable or something that needs to be heard whether you want to hear it or not. And I feel it's a moral responsibility to do that.
Yeah, so for entertainment purposes only is not to be confused with the art of storytelling.
At least for me.
Yeah.
I don't want to say this is somebody else's obligation, because sometimes just being entertained, having a laugh, is exactly what's in order. And there's a place for that, but people are not going to be rolling on the floor when they hear me tell.
So how were you first introduced to storytelling as a professional art?
Wow. The first time I even heard of a professional storyteller was when my little girls were very little, probably 1 and 4. I was working as a docent for an outdoor venue that was in the middle of a natural meadow. And the person who ran this venue decided to bring a professional storyteller out as entertainment. And my initial response was, what the heck is that? So I drug my girls along to hear her. And that was Elizabeth Ellis. Yeah, great introduction, huh?
Right. I mean, like, if you're going to be introduced to it, you might as well be introduced to it by Elizabeth Ellis.
And so it got to the point where several other times I saw Elizabeth was being featured somewhere, and I'd pack up the kids and go. You know, I was using the guise of, well, of course, a good mother takes her kids, but whether the kids enjoyed it or not was secondary.
I love it. And may I just say that a meadow, that you were a docent for a meadow, and how, oh my gosh, how amazing that would be to have a place like it's just a meadow. What are you going to do here? You're going to look at the meadow. Like, it's like you need to like put your brakes on, sit your butt down, and look at the meadow.
Yes.
So I
And
love that.
they would occasionally bring in like a quartet, a string quartet or something like that
Yes.
to perform. And then while you were waiting, and then afterwards you could walk around said meadow and spot the birds or the wildflowers.
That just, my shoulders just dropped when you said that. I was like, oh, that sounds beautiful.
Oh, it
Well,
was.
and I know, like, now, and I put this as the first question, and then, but I ask you something different. And now I feel like it's like jumping in really deep at the very beginning. But Peggy, why do you tell stories?
Why do I tell stories? To me, you got to get psychological, you know, get into that self-reflection point. The stories I pick to tell are a reflection of what I need to deal with in my personal life.
Mm.
And often when I know storytellers,
Mm-hmm.
if I know them well enough, I can actually go, oh, there's mom, or there's his brother. Um, quite often, the stories we tell are what we're processing in our own life.
I love that. And actually that's a question that I've been coming to, because as new to stage storytelling, I'll just put it like that, I often am very conflicted about like, what story do I tell? Who is going to be in this audience? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what I don't know. And so I have like been like pulling back the layers, and really like I came to this understanding. It's like, Shane, you got to start with the story you want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And then you may have to have several, because when you get before an audience, sometimes we don't always know who's going to be our audience in advance. And so like this one may not be appropriate for this. And so like that's a nuanced thing, and like a very dynamic thing that I'm just beginning to understand with storytelling. But yeah, it's all about me.
It really is.
Imagine that. So I'm the center of my universe, and so is everybody else. So, well, how did you get started in storytelling? And I'm going to combine these questions and kind of learn that craft, because your story is very unique about the kind of stories that you began to tell.
Yeah. Well, I went and listened to Elizabeth for several years. ended up getting a divorce, falling in love with this weirdo who one of his qualities was that he was a really good storyteller, and I enjoyed listening to his stories. We got married. We were married for 10 years. Now, just before we got married, I was in grad school. And he wouldn't put it this way because he's too nice, at least not in public. But, I can say it. Because I was in grad school, I had 2 little girls. I was commuting. It was stressful. Basically, Gene very nicely put, you are really in a bitchy mood. You need to just relax, chill, have some fun this weekend. Let me introduce you to this wonderful little festival I discovered. And he took me to the Texas Storytelling Festival. It was wonderful. I was hooked as a listener. And I continued to go with him every year. Took the girls with us when they were little. Loved it. But you could not have paid me to even tell a story on the swapping grounds. No way, no how. I was too shy.
Yeah.
Way
And
too
just to
shy.
clarify, the swaps are just little bitty intimate kind of almost, I mean, they're not in a living room, but living room, you're not on stage, you're not anything. You're just in a very small group.
Oh, right. And back
Yeah.
then, the festival was still intense. So usually it was 3 or 4 people sitting on hay bales.
Right. Yeah. Very, very safe.
Right.
I'm
Yeah,
with you on that.
I was horribly shy, painfully shy. Wouldn't do it. But Gene had begun telling at a drug and alcohol treatment center here in Dallas. And he began telling with a second teller, and I would often come along. Gene liked for me to come along because he's, for no other reason than the fact that he was kind of disturbed at what he was hearing from the people at the center on their ideas of what a healthy relationship was. He said, for no other reason can we just model a healthy relationship. I'm not sure if there wasn't an underlying reason that he was trying to pull me in, but I was glad to do that, and I loved listening to the stories they would tell. But his partner then announced they were moving out of state. Gene needed to find another partner and couldn't do it because there's certain parameters you had to have telling in a treatment center. You had to know the right stories that needed to be told. You needed to know the issues involved with drug and alcohol addiction and know how to address them, recognize them, work around them, that sort of thing. And you had to be willing to dedicate that time, which was twice a month. And by the time you got all the parameters met, there was no one left. So basically I was told, look, I need somebody. The only issue is you're too shy to tell, but they need to hear the stories more than you need to be shy. Get over it. And I couldn't argue with that because one of the things that I was experiencing going to that treatment center was being able to sit back and firsthand witness a difference those stories were making. And one of my favorite stories about witnessing that was sitting behind one of the guys listening to Gene tell a story. And the whole time, this guy was sitting there with his arms crossed, doing this like he was bored out of his mind, wasn't going to let Gene get to him. But under his breath, I was hearing him go, yep, that's right. Boy, he's got me there. Uh-huh. The whole time. He wasn't going to let Gene see it.
Yeah.
So after we were done, Gene and I got in the car and Gene was going, man, I didn't reach this guy at all. And that's really disappointing. This guy I knew had been a suspected murderer. I mean, he was one tough cookie. He knew how to hide all those feelings, emotions, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So he managed to fool Gene, but he didn't manage to block my ears. So I could overhear him where Gene couldn't.
Yeah.
So I was able to tell Gene, yeah, you reached him. He just didn't let you know.
Yeah.
And I was
And
seeing that over and over again.
yeah. And that's only one kind of storytelling that you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes just pure entertainment is what's
Yeah.
needed. Sometimes we need a laugh. A lot of times, do it for education. One of the other things Gene and I do is we work part-time as historical interpreters. And we're sharing the stories of the people in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of fun. It's way more fun to hear stories about the people than it is getting a lecture about people.
Yeah. Yeah. And y'all tell at festivals, you do workshops, like you have lots of things. Like when you were developing your craft, like who did you go to? How did you do that? Did you have a mentor? Um, how did that evolve once you agreed to get over your shyness and let Gene woo you one more time?
Well, Gene finally got me to do it. I told 10 minutes first time, about 30 minutes the second time. By the third time, which was like 6 weeks later, it was full blown and I was hooked. And we decided we were going to stick our toe in the water and tell together, play with doing tandem. And that's when Elizabeth Ellis was like, excuse me, why don't you move in with me and work with me? And she had done this with a couple of other storytellers because she was raising a grandson. And by this time he was in high school. She traveled a lot, needed someone to be there for the grandkid, and in return, she would mentor you.
Wow.
All our kids had just moved out of the house. And so we were like, what have we got holding us here? We live in a rent house, our lease is almost up. So we got rid of most of our stuff, threw the rest in storage, and moved in with Elizabeth and just worked with her.
Isn't that beautiful too? Because it goes with that the saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You just have to see the opportunity that presents itself to you. And what I mean, to live literally with a living storytelling legend.
Yeah, there were times I think if we'd have done it smart, we would have sold slots. Okay, you can come and spend this month here.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, like an artist in residency. Oh my gosh, that concept is brilliant. Now, and I will have to tell you, like, what year was this? Because like I've just been introduced to Elizabeth in the past 5 years because I really am new to the storytelling world as you know it. And that, I mean, and
This is really terrible. I should go back and look it up. I want to say it was about between
but just 20, 30 years ago, 10 years ago,
about 20 years ago.
about 20 years ago.
It was
Okay.
either 2000 or 2001,
Okay. That's
somewhere in
amazing.
there.
Yeah. Wow. And then how did you work on your craft of storytelling? What were some of the things, and like living with Elizabeth, how then did you learn? How was that part of it?
Some of it was we actually just went around with her, and there were a few times we even did get a chance to travel with her, like
Mm-hmm.
go to the National Storytelling Festival with her several times. Um, just go to local gigs, see how things are done, small versus large, and in between, um, storytelling for different audiences, that sort of thing.
So like an apprenticeship.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oh,
one of the things that Gene and I came away from it with was, as romantic as being a headliner is, what's called a first namer.
mm-hmm.
Um, if somebody says they're having Elizabeth at their storytelling festival, nobody says Elizabeth who. If you're having Donald at your festival, nobody goes Donald who, first namer.
Yeah.
That Gene and I had come away thinking, we don't think we want to be a first namer. The thought of having your career based on having to be on the road so much was not what we wanted.
Yeah.
What we really loved, we loved the idea of being professional, uh, being able to do it often enough to earn some money at it. But we also liked that healing aspect, being able to tell to those small audiences and really work on those stories. For
Yeah,
those,
because if you went on the road, you wouldn't be able to do your twice a month at the and I don't know if you want to name the name of it, but y'all are still doing that. Like
yeah,
how many years
it's
has
on our
that been going
website,
on?
so we can do it. But sadly, we're not doing it now.
Oh, and then well, yeah, and some people don't have this computer Zoom option privilege of having this kind of technology at their fingertips.
Well, and frustratingly enough, it even began before then
Mm.
because they shut down, for 6, 7, 8, 9 months because they had to move.
Mm. I remember that.
And when it got started back up, a lot of the old staff we had worked with were gone. So we got part of the program up because I guess about 2 years before the move, we had started a new program where in the mornings we were still doing storytelling. Once a week, we were going in and doing training programs on how to tell your story of recovery well. So when they finally got opened back up, we got that part of the programs restarted, up and running. It was going great guns. But every time we tried to get the morning program reinitiated, the one we had started 20 years earlier, somebody would throw a monkey wrench in that.
Mm.
And that's one of the really tough things about telling in those sort of environments is you have a high turnover rate. It's
Yeah.
one of those things I'm like, caveat, caveat, caveat. If you want to do this work, like we used to tell for a number of years at a domestic violence shelter. And every time we turned around, there was some kind of issue that would come up where we would have to stop for a little while and then restart. And then there's a large overturn of employees because working in those kind of environments are so emotionally stressful that it just seemed like constantly we were having to reintroduce ourselves and re-explain why we wanted to offer our services and what we could do for them, that there were times that it was like we got so exhausted from doing that part of it that it was like, it's time to step away.
Yeah. So when you're working with people in the recovery or trying to recreate their own story and tell that, it's easy to find the story and what you're trying to do is help somebody see something different about their life that maybe they had, and I feel this from my own perspective, a victim of something, but also like if you could just shift it just a little bit, and because you're still sitting here means you're also a survivor of something. But when you're looking for stories outside yourself or that more traditional stories, like where do you tend to find those kinds of stories? And I know they've got to have an internal connection, but what are the places that you look to find stories outside yourself to tell?
Wow. I wish I could take my computer, pick it up, and just kind of walk around the room I'm in. because I've got most of it hidden behind me. A few stories I have heard from other tellers.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I say I don't take their versions because I think that's really, really wrong. Storytellers work really, really hard to get their stories. So I might take the traditional story, and I only do that if it is a very traditional story. And I still check with them to make sure it's okay with them.
But what you're not showing behind the curtain is
It's lots and
volumes and
lots of
volumes of books.
Yes. I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 full-size bookshelves in here. Another 3 in there. So that's 9, 10, 11, 12 full-size bookshelves plus 2 half bookshelves.
Yeah. So how do you tell, like, when you're reading through these volumes and volumes and volumes, that a particular story is one that you want to tell and or is particularly right for you to tell?
A lot of times they just kind of grab me by the throat, throw me against the wall, and slap me around.
Okay.
Yeah, there are some, and
So you have a strong emotional reaction to them.
yes, almost.
Visceral.
There are several stories that are like, oh my God, you've got to tell this story.
So in a sense, does the story say, tell me, pick me,
Yes,
tell me?
most definitely does.
How interesting. Yeah. And then, so what do you do then to make it your own?
Um, Tell it a lot,
Mm,
practice it a lot, run through my head. And then there's the difference between tandem stories and solo stories,
right.
because sometimes, especially with tandem stories, because a tandem story, if it doesn't mesh with both of us, no matter how much you like it, it's not going to work.
Right.
There have been stories that Gene and I have worked together, and we have tried to beat a story into submission. And finally, we've had to go, okay, just give it up. It's not going to work. And then there have been stories that we started 10 years ago, just almost came to blows over because it wasn't working. We didn't like how each other was doing it. And then 10 years later, picked it up and went, why did we have so much trouble with this? Because
Yeah.
it just fell into place.
It was the
Yeah.
timing of the story. That's really interesting. Yeah. And then when you're going before an audience, how do y'all determine, either the solo or the tandem, you can share with either, how do you determine what stories that you're going to tell? Because that sometimes it changes. Like, you may have a set list, right? But then, like, do you kind of get in the moment too sometimes?
Oh, definitely. I'm one of these tellers that I cannot stand the thought of going up on stage or even in front of a small group, not having some idea of what I'm going to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Those tellers who can walk up on stage and go, what am I going to tell y'all? I'm in awe of, because I would freak out. I would just like stand there with my thumb in my mouth for 20 minutes.
Yeah,
But
I do definitely think that's an evolutionary process.
I have not hit that level yet.
Yeah.
Not that self-aware. But there have been times when I have told a story and then gone, judging from the reaction from this group, the next story is not going to work. I think I should tell this one instead. Definitely, I've done that a lot.
So that's I think that you're connecting with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely.
And
Yeah, the pre audience reaction, like, I will sense what you need to hear from me, is like, whoa.
well, that, and sometimes I love those stories that go on a real introspective level. And sometimes it drives Gene crazy because Gene is like, half the audience is staring at you going, what the hell was that? I'm like,
It's
I
like you
don't
telling
care.
your dream. Let me tell you what I dreamed last night.
To me, it's like, I don't care. The other half is going, whoa,
Yes,
that's what I
yes.
want to read. The other half doesn't get it. I'm sorry. You'll like the next story, I promise.
Well, what techniques do you use to practice your stories? So once you've kind of decided and like this is a story that needs to be told, this is a story that wants me to tell it, then
Yeah. Very different for tandem telling
mhm.
versus by myself. Um, it's interesting because I know a lot of storytellers say they record their stories and then go back and listen to them. Nope, 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 not for me. Oddly enough, my learning method is kinesthetic first, visual second, auditory comes number third.
Mm.
Number third, good
Never
heavens.
What's your kinesthetic? What do you do? Like I'm very kinesthetic, so I'm interested in this.
Handwrite.
I do. I
I
do
like
that
to
too.
handwrite my stories. Typing number two.
Okay.
Because
I
I
do
spend
interpretive dance.
interesting. I'd like to have a view of that sometime.
Yeah, sometimes I'll act it out kind of
Oh,
thing. Yeah, to get to embody my story. Yeah.
okay.
I do that in the privacy of my own home. So,
I practice a lot when I'm driving. I'm
mm-hmm.
by myself and it's brand new. Just telling it while I'm driving because there's nothing else to distract me. Well, other than 2 million of the drivers around me,
Yeah.
but there's no dogs, no telephone, no TV, no radio. I just tell my story. But as tandem tellers, that's a whole different ball game. I type out our stories and do red for me, blue for Gene, automatically. That way, no matter what story we're working on, we can look at it and go, this is my part, this is his part. And a lot of times that will so deviate. It's funny to go back, tell a tandem story for a couple of years and then go back and look at how we originally had typed it out as his part, my part, his part, my part. And it's like totally different. But it gets me kick-started because
Yeah.
Gene's very auditory. Gene can hear somebody tell a story one time and a month later get up and tell that story. I can't do that. No way, no how. It's never going to happen. So telling tandem together sometimes can be marriage threatening because we have such different learning styles.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing I have learned with that is we're both visual learners, secondary. So what we have learned is to practice in front of a mirror.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that way we can mesh together.
I like that. I like
And
that.
that was really a huge revelation for us. We had been tandem telling together for years before it dawned on us that we needed to practice in front of a mirror. And it was like, oh, duh. But it was life-saving for us.
Well, and you've talked about your shyness already, and then I would add, because some people don't want to hear even the sound of their own voice. So, like, recording it is weird, but then, like, to do mirror practicing and all this kind of stuff. So, what advice do you have for people who do get nervous or have anxiety about even doing it in private, like listening to their own voice or watching their own image? Like, how do you move that to be able to do it publicly? Or advice?
For me, I got to go back to what I was told at Homeward Bound. The story needs to be heard. Just as a society, speaking as someone, just as an American, I see a nation that is experiencing a whole lot of pain, way before all this COVID nonsense hit.
Yeah.
A lot of us are in pain.
Mm-hmm.
Stories can make a difference in healing from that pain. And if we have those stories in us, we're obligated to share it. We all have a role in alleviating that pain. So we got to step outside of our own fear and discomfort to take that part in healing.
That's powerful.
It's helped me a lot in getting over that fear.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to the point where sometimes I feel a little nervous, but I never get that, oh my God, can I do this? It's more like, oh my God, I got to get up there and do this.
Yeah. Does like, and then for me personally, like being a part of the Dallas Storytelling Guild helped me find a safe circle to do that. Do you, what advantages do you see with story circles or guilds or groups or associations? And it may be beyond a safe place to like practice your story before you get up on stage.
Definitely a place to practice and to get feedback. I think it's real
Yeah.
important to start getting
Yes.
feedback and learning how to ignore the feedback that doesn't serve you. We have no control over who offers feedback in a guild,
Mm-hmm.
but I've seen times where I was like, why did you say that to that teller? That wasn't helpful.
Yeah.
But sometimes learning to let that roll off and to ignore it may be vital.
Yeah. And that pulls it all back to you because you know what you're trying to do. And so like if you are, and your path is going to be your path. I love the kind of the quote by Joseph Campbell. It's like, if you step into the woods, so to speak, and there's a clear path before you, you're not going your way.
Yeah.
And so like you got to be said about what way you're going. So if somebody offers you something, you're like, this is a nugget I can put in my pocket. This one I'm going to cast aside. You're right, because you do get well, even when you solicit advice and feedback, you do get a lot that you're like, and you just have to be gracious and go on, because whatever they're telling you may have been super beneficial for them. And so, and they're just sharing something that was helpful for them. But
And
yeah.
it can come from somebody you least expect it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can cite this wonderful example Gene and I had told at the bathhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And Jan Powers and her husband Gary were in the audience. And after we got home, Jan called me. Now, Jan Powers is just an amazing person to get feedback from.
Mm-hmm.
But so it took me by surprise when she called afterwards and said, well, my husband Gary has a suggestion. So whenever you're ready, let me know and he'll share it. I'm like, spit it out now.
Yeah.
I mean, just the fact that he's married to somebody who gives fabulous feedback, it was like, I want to hear it. What he suggested was like, oh my God, that is fabulous. I wish we had thought of it. We incorporated it into the story and it doubled the strength of the story.
Yes.
And it was one very simple thing.
Yeah.
But it was incredible.
Yeah, that happened to me with the second story I ever told publicly. And I was testing it out before a friend, and he made one comment that I thought made that story. Like, it was just so incredible. So, yeah, I love that. I love that. So, well, what what stories that are in your, or what story, I'm going to do singular. What story in your repertoire do you look forward to having the opportunity to tell?
as a solo storyteller,
Mm-hmm.
probably it would be The Stolen Bairn.
Mm.
And as a tandem teller, probably Middle Woman. And it's a story that we get an opportunity to tell quite a bit, but I never get tired of telling it. And I need to say that Middle Woman is not a folktale or fairy tale. It is a literary story that we did get permission from Orson Scott Card to tell. So I got to give kudos to Orson Scott Card for that story.
Awesome. And I don't think I've heard either one of those stories. So I can't wait to hear.
Oh, I can see The Stolen Bairn. It's about a 30-minute story. That's why
Yeah.
you don't hear me tell that one very much. But Middle Woman is one that we get a lot of requests for.
Yeah. Yeah, we might have to make a supplement to this recording where you like record those two stories and then post them too.
Oh, heartbreaker. We cannot do a recording of Middle Woman.
Oh yeah, because it's from a literary story.
Yeah,
Okay.
Scott Card said, I can give you permission to tell it, but I don't have the recording copyright for it, so you can't record it.
Wow, yeah. Oh, and that's a lot to consider too, because there's stories that I do love, but then they're literary, so it's like, I don't know. And that gets really complicated. That's one of the reasons that I tend to write my own stories, because I just have the freedom to do with them whatever I want. So,
I'm trying to think of how many literary stories we do, and maybe 2 or 3 because of that permission thing.
yeah. Well, one of the questions I just looked up and asked, and I don't mean to interrupt, but thought was really important, is how do you make a story your own?
Oh, gosh. That's a process.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Okay.
like giving birth to a baby. You know, when you have the baby, you got 2 sets of genes, his and hers.
Yeah.
And then you start to raise that baby. You're the only ones that have control over it. But as the kid gets older and older and older, there's all these outside influences that come. And then by the time they're adult, that's still your kid. It's always going to be your kid. It's always going to have half your genes. But all these outside influences have affected it over the years, and it takes on a life of its own. So the more you tell it, the older the story gets, the more it comes out of your mouth, the more it changes and grows.
Mm.
You know, like I said, going back and reviewing those tandem stories Gene and I have told over the years, and then go back and look at the original script that we created. It's like, is that the same story?
Wow. Yeah.
So they really do. They tell you how they're going to grow up.
Yeah. And what storytelling groups are you a part of? I feel like I'm being not a good interviewer right now because I'm skipping around, but I'm like, I kind of want to get everything in.
Okay, look, well, obviously the 2 biggies that I have to point out are the Dallas Storytelling Guild and the Tejas Storytelling Association. I was involved first with the Tejas Storytelling Association because I got involved with the festival. Gene was a big-time volunteer with them from the very beginning, so because I was with him, I volunteered. But because
what's one of your favorite, not favorite, I'm going to take that back. What's a memory that you have of the Texas Storytelling Festival that you love to tell about?
Sheesh. I think so many. As far as social impact,
Mm-hmm.
since that's such a big thing for me. There was a storyteller who's now deceased. He was Baba Ayubu Bakari Kamau. And it was at the very beginning. It was either at the first or second festival I was at. He got up and told a story that now most people are familiar with, but 30 years ago, no one knew about. And that was the race riots of Tulsa.
Yes.
He told that story, and I sat there in the audience, shocked and pissed off. I don't think I've ever been so angry sitting in a storytelling audience. And for so many reasons. First of all, what had happened to those poor people in Tulsa? And then the fact that I considered myself, I mean, I was completing my master's degree at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I consider myself a well-educated person. I had moved to Texas when I was 6 years old. Why had I never heard this story before?
Yeah. That's when you realize, like, there's a lot of things that don't get told or get told privately and stay underground for a long period of time before they resurface and make their way and like come back up, because it's not safe. It's not safe to tell stories sometimes.
And so that was like a huge revelation for me.
Yeah.
And I have totally drawn a blank on the second thing I was going to share about this.
That one's pretty, that one's pretty powerful. And it kind of, and it's perfect because now I feel like it leads me back to where I'm going. And like, what do you see kind of as the evolution of stories now that more, I feel, I don't know, like we have venues, platforms for more stories to be told, and stories that can't make it through the gatekeepers, stories that can't make it into books that are mass produced, stories that can't make it into classrooms. Like, we have a way for stories to be told, and you still kind of have to vet it as you hear it, because nobody's saying, here, let me present this to you. Like, you have to have the responsibility to listen and have a discerning ear. But what do you see as the evolution of stories as we move into like an online platform where Big Brother is probably listening to all of the stories that we tell?
I think the biggest thing is we need to encourage more people to tell.
I agree.
I know there's some resistance in the community because people see it as a threat to professionalism. If, there's only so many storytelling jobs, and if we get more, to me, that's like saying that we have to limit the number of singers.
Mm-hmm.
There is a place for professional singers. There's always going to be a place for professional singers, and there's a place for front porch singing, and everything in between. Same thing with storytelling. We need to encourage people to be out there telling.
Yeah.
The more people who are sharing the stories, the more we all learn, because the whole point is being able to understand each other. The more we know each other's stories, the more we'll understand, the more healing we do.
I agree with that. So, is there anything about yourself or story or you as a storyteller that that you want to share with me that I haven't asked?
Oh, geez. I'm not thinking of anything we haven't covered already.
Okay, well, I will go through something. So one of the things that I loved too about you and Gene, who I believe, are mentors to me, you were my first contact. You were my first, I auditioned for y'all and y'all gave me feedback. Like, this was like, that was and I did it. Notice I didn't tell a story in Story Circle for the first time. I told a story to you and Gene only. to see if I was doing it right because it was beyond the scope of my understanding till I actually did it of what I was doing. But you both, so Peggy Helmick-Richardson, when you married Gene, you kept your name, but also Gene took your name too. So Gene is Gene Helmick-Richardson. But then when we were talking about that before I started recording, you said there's more to the story. And I want to hear that because, yeah, I just do.
Well, when I got divorced, I didn't divorce this guy because I still wanted to hang around with him.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I don't want to be saddled with a name from somebody I find totally unpleasant. So I made sure that in the divorce decree, it was written that I would go back to my maiden name. I worked hard to make sure that that never got struck from the document. It was there to the very end. So when Gene and I started dating and then started talking about marriage, Gene was like, I don't want you to change your name to my name. You worked hard. You were diligent on going back and saying, this is my name. This is who I am. Marrying me does not make you mine.
Mm.
So I really feel strongly about you keeping your maiden name. So I was like, cool. Well, as soon as we got married, immediately there was all this blowback with, oh, you two aren't married. So you two are living together with your kids living with you. And Gene was starting to go, I'm really not comfortable with that aspect.
Yeah. People not comprehending that you just retained your own names.
Because the kids have to deal with this.
Yeah.
So I think the name Helmick is really a cool name. So I'm going to change my name to Helmick. And I'm like, oh, time out. You're from a small West Texas town. And I know there's a couple of members of your family who are like, we're not really comfortable with this city girl you married. And she's really liberal, even though they were totally not saying that Gene is incredibly liberal long before he met me. They're going to see it as, or at least I perceived it as, they were going to see it as how I had infiltrated his mind and changed him.
Mm.
So I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm comfortable with you changing your name to mine. That may push it over the top. And Gene said, well, then I'll hyphenate. And he trotted down and got his driver's license changed to Gene Helmick-Richardson.
I love it.
And when he went in to do that, everyone was like, ooh, liberated new age man, how wonderful. And I'm like, wow, okay, so he's hyphenated and I'm not? Yeah. Oh, hell no. So I went down and changed my name and hyphenated it. And what did I get? Oh, you're one of those feminist bitches, aren't you? As a matter of fact, a woman at the driver's license place pushed the application back to me and said, you're not allowed to hyphenate your name. And I said, yes, I am, and pushed the form back at her. And she pushed it back and said, no, we can't take it if it's hyphenated. And I just pushed it back and said, yes, you can. And she pushed it back to me and said, pick a name and I'll scratch the other one out. And I said, Helmick-Richardson. And At this point, she was getting really angry. And she called the police officer that was on standby, like there always is at the DMV, and called him over and said, "This woman is giving me trouble." And he said, looks at me and goes, "What's the problem?" And I said, "She's forcing me to change my name." And woman says, "She wants to hyphenate her name." And he looks at me, looks at her, and then looks back at her again and goes, "It's her name. What's your problem?" And walks off.
I love it. I
But I'm
love
like,
it.
Gene gets this woman who thinks he's the most wonderful man to ever walk the earth, and I get grief.
I know. Well, and this is what too many people quite don't understand, that patriarchy is not men, it's a system. And
Yeah.
they're like the system, and it's like order and structure and rules that benefit men. So, but yeah, it can definitely be a system that is perpetuated by women who don't understand your experience or your choices or your desires as how you want to exemplify being a woman.
It's going to be a long, slow battle.
No, I think it's done. We're flipping that switch.
Yeah.
I love it too, because I have a naming story, and I have a driver's license attendant that called the police officer over on me story too. But mine was that one was really short and funny. I had spent the summer in Alaska and wanted to get an Alaska driver's license, so I got one. And when I got back to Texas to go back to school, because it was when I was in college, I went to go renew my Texas driver's license, and I thought they would just give me the one with the same picture. And so I went really early one morning, no makeup on, my hair all a mess. And they were like, "Stand there and take your picture." And I was like, "Oh, I'll be back." And I just turned around and left. And so when I got my hair done and my makeup on, came back to do my picture, that she goes, "That's the one that just left." And I was like, "Yeah." I said, "My mama would have killed me if I'd have come here and had my picture made with no makeup and my hair not done." So, oh, well, Peggy, I really, the big question: what storyteller do you think that I should ask to interview next?
Well, I got to have two.
Okay.
One, of course, is Elizabeth Ellis.
Yeah, she's on my personal private list.
But another teller I could recommend is Laura Packer.
Oh, she's on my personal private list. Yes.
Laura, I still remember hearing Laura when she was still a relatively new teller. I was up at the conference in Bellingham, Washington. And she was still what I would classify as a kid. I mean, she was an adult, but she was still a very young teller. And I remember sitting back going, "Damn, that gal's gonna go far." She had me rolling. She was so funny and insightful. Very, very, very insightful teller. She has continued with her storytelling through some very trying times in her life. And it has made her telling very, very insightful. She's experienced an amazing amount of emotion and turmoil and questioning in her life for someone so young. Plus, she had a fascinating mentor to boot. Teller, I don't know if you would have never heard him live, but if you ever get a chance to hear a recording of him and see him, she was mentored by a teller named Brother Blue.
I've heard the name, yeah.
Quite the character. Quite the amazing character.
Yeah.
Well, so cool. If you get some Brother Blue stories, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much, Peggy Helmick-Richardson. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate the pre-time that you gave me to help me kind of set this format up. And one of the things we didn't talk about, but I want to mention now, that I'm going to get your contact information, your links, and put them in the YouTube below. So if anybody happens to watch this and wants to get a hold of Peggy for storytelling, or Twice Upon a Time Storytellers, their information and contact list will be listed below. And this is Shane Larango. Wait, hold on, I'm going to do that again. This is Shane Larango, storyteller. I'm still working on this. Okay, take 3. This is Shane Larango, Storyteller Stories. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Shane. Mwah.